Sound test up to that.
Open microphone. You need the microphone.
Alright. So you can hear me now? Good. Alright. Well, I would like to say thank you to all the previous speakers today. You've set me up beautifully. But more than that, I think it's been a really nice kind of scaling from the big picture and the big issues, right, as we move down towards government level, down to national level, and then down to farm level. So up to this point, we've been focused on carbon, but to this point, you could almost be forgiven for thinking that carbon is kind of something in a nice flat box you can tie a bow around and step all the time. It's really something that is, Jim's talk really touched on it before around the fact that there's more to it than that. But the challenge we have in our systems is actually taking that carbon concept and moving that concept into something that actually makes sense. And actually aligns with what our reality looks like when we look at dirt on. So today we'll just have a bit of a play around with what does soil carbon look like in our farming systems. So we're talking about, it's very nice to talk about something that's very abstract and simple, but when we start talking about farming systems and productivity, it all goes out the window. We're talking about a very dynamic, fluxing environment. So where does carbon fit into that? And I live in Rutherglen in North East Victoria, we're in Beechworth. I thought we might just bring a few wine barrels into the discussion as well. Okay, so I'll go through what is soil carbon at a very basic level, how soil carbon accumulates in our soil. I'm going to talk about environmental limits. What are key factors in building carbon? And I'll talk about what we call the most limited factor in our systems. And a question I get asked probably every second day is, why aren't my numbers going up? So this will just reinforce a few of the things that the other speakers have talked about as well. So we'll just start. Okay, so what is soil carbon? When we think about it in a very abstract way, we tend to think about this nice brown-looking material that we see in dirt. Relatively homogeneous in nature. We kind of consider organic matter as something that you can't see the clear residues anymore. It's kind of broken down to that extent that it all kind of looks the same. So when we think about soil carbon, that's pretty much what we think about. But there's a lot more to it than that, which Jim touched on before. The challenge we have is that all the organic carbon in our soils is present within that water matrix that we call organic matter. And that organic matter isn't just carbon. It's comprised of nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, potassium, hydrogen, oxygen, all these other elements. So we take out charcoal and carbonates because they're what we call inorganic carbon, which sounds like a bit of an oxymoron. A bit of chemical explanation for that, but just park it. To say that charcoal and carbonates aren't part of our discussion around organic carbon in our systems. But everything else is within that organic matter in the matrix. So what we know is that carbon in organic matter can only be maintained in the presence of the other nutrients. This is really important when we start talking about carbon stocks and budgets and long-term sequestration, is that we're not carbon farming as such. We actually need to support carbon with the other nutrients that are present in organic matter. And what we know is that soil organic matter has a consistent ratio of those nutrients. So carbon cannot exist in our soils unless we support it with everything else. An example, which I'll come back to through our chat, is carbon-nitrogen ratio in organic matter is 10 to 1. That's pretty standard across the world. If you have 10 parts of carbon in an organic matter, you need 1 part of nitrogen to hold it there. If you don't, you can't hold that carbon. So if you want to drill down further, and just because I've got some funky pictures, I thought you might be interested in things like the today, and get a bit techy, sciencey. So this is what we call organic matter at that really fine scale. So this is what we call particulate organic matter. That which is cycling through, and that carbon in that organic matter is going to continue to cycle and break down. If you want to take even a closer look at carbon in our soils, we can go down to the sub-micrometer scale, look at nanometer reactions, nothing's to interact with that surface. So what this is basically showing us is that carbon is carbon. But there's a lot more to it than that one black box with the number on it that we think about a lot when we think about carbon. It's an incredibly complex system, organic carbon, how carbon and the other elements interact, all the chemical, physical and biological associations that happen there. So there's a lot of dynamic interaction there. So, how does soil carbon accumulate? So this has been touched on a few times today. What we're going to do with a refresher. There's a brand new chemical process that's been developed and discovered in the last few years. It's called photosynthesis. You might have heard about it in the popular press. But it's the essence for how carbon in the atmosphere comes into our soils. So a lot of it is discovered, which has been, a lot of myths which have been dispelled already today. But when we think about carbon in soils, a lot of the language is around carbon in the atmosphere being captured in our soils. Not much of the discussion actually talks about the fact that it has to go through a plant to get there. So that really means that plants are the key driver in any of our carbon capture processes. So, photosynthesis, we take that atmospheric CO2, comes into the plant through photosynthesis, gets converted into carbohydrates, gets distributed through the plant, some of it goes down the roots, but it all has a job to do. Then, when that plant dies, or that the leaves fall off, or we have litter coming through, there's microbes that decompose that plant litter, and they break it down into what we call soil organic matter. Then those microbes die. There is no other microbes. It's a sad story, really. And that by that cycling of the microbial growing, dying process, we can actually build carbon in our systems. So, if there is a net accumulation of carbon in that process, we can say that carbon from the atmosphere has been captured or sequestered in soil. If the kicker is that, like us, most of the microbes that are involved in this process breathe in oxygen and they breathe out CO2. They also breathe out, some of them breathe out nitrous oxide and other greenhouse gases. So it's not a perfect process. So this is why when we see residue on the soil and then we see the breakdown, we don't see this incredible linear increase in soil carbon in the systems. It's highly inefficient because there's a lot of other stuff going on. Just a brain break.
Sorry.
So the key is that net accumulation process. So in some ways, it's a bit of a contrast to what we describe as a healthy soil. We talk about healthy systems, we've got healthy soils. Healthy soils involve a lot of microbes. Microbes in the system mean a lot of turnover, also mean a lot of breathing. So a lot of CO2 being produced there. That's why we have such all these numbers around the emissions associated with soil processes. It comes from the microbial community. So the key thing here is the plant is the focus of the system. So the soil carbon is actually a product of the systems that we're dealing with. It's not a driver. So when we think about soil carbon, it's the end game. It's something that happens if we do everything else well. It's not something that we can directly influence by adding something directly into the system. And this is when things like environmental limits also come into play, which have also been played before. So there's a lot of limitations on how much carbon we can actually put in through plants and store in our soils. What we do know is that climate has a lot to do with it, which is referred earlier to the fact that a lot of soil carbon source can be related back to rainfall. So if we have high humidity and moisture in our systems, we do have high microbial communities, but the fact that we have so much biomass coming through means we have the capacity to build. So those soils, those systems, can actually build a lot more soil carbon than what we can in our generally low rainfall environment. We also have soil specifics. So we know that clay soils can actually bind and hold a lot more carbon than our sand soils are. You know that, anyone who's done soil tests. The difference between the soil test of carbon you get back from the sand soils compared to clays can be really significant. And that's because the clays provide a habitat for the microbes to live, because they've got nooks and crannies. They can hold a lot more moisture, which means that the microbes again are living in their environment. We can get chemical bonding directly with the carbon in place to hold it in place. And then we also have that physical benefit of that in our soil structure as well. In comparison, a lot of our sands, we consider them like styrofoam balls. They're quite big, very little charge, and very little opportunity for hiding if you're a microbe, or for binding if you're organic. The key thing is that each soil has its own threshold of carbon capacity. It's not a linear increase, which again has been flagged before. So if you've got a sandy soil in a low rainfall environment, your expectations around how much carbon you can build should be a lot lower than if you're in a heavy soil in a high rainfall environment. So when you're thinking about building soil carbon, what are you thinking? So again, soil carbon is a product of the system. It's not the driver. So the best way to grow carbon is to grow plants, which then support microbes. But that just seems a little bit too simple. We just need to grow something. But the key is how we grow our plants to ensure that they're the best plants that they can be. So what we need to do is to say, well, we can grow plants and we can do everything well, but what's holding those plants back from either exploring the roots, getting the root systems down as much as they can, or getting really good plant growth and photosynthetic capacity. So the first thing is to identify your constraints in the system. Do you have any physical constraints? Can water and oxygen move into that soil? Do we have chemical constraints like acidity, which I think touch on in a bit? Is there something else that's stopping that plant from growing as well as it can? And then nutrient deficiencies. We know that organic matter can't exist without the other nutrients in play as well. So how do we make sure that we're covering off on those bases? Key thing that keeps coming back all the time in the carbon space is maintaining the organism system. It is the one best thing that you can do to improve your chances of holding carbon in the system. So what we know is that having legumes builds up what we call our organic nitrogen back. So this is the nitrogen that's derived from plants. So it's in quite robust carbon structures, takes a lot of breakdown, and it becomes like asymptote, so slow release of nitrogen into the system. By doing that, you're ensuring that the carbon has enough nitrogen to be maintained. And so if we increase our soil carbon levels, and through increasing our organic nitrogen component, we actually lift the whole system's capacity. So this is really what you call a triple win. So what's good for plant growth is also good for microbes, and is also good for soil carbon. So we don't have to choose between carbon farming and good for productivity. Because the key thing that we should always be thinking about is, first and foremost, we need to reduce food and fibre. That's what we get paid for, and that's what our job is. That's what our soil's job is too. So we have to, by supporting that soil in doing its best job to produce food and fibre, it's actually giving it the best capacity to hold it going in that system. So let's talk about mineral. Here is a good chance. It's almost 3 o'clock, 1 o'clock, carry this on. So there was a guy who goes so famous for making a fancy name out of a hole in the wine barrel. His name is Lee, and he referred to something called the law of the universe. So the thinking is that it actually came from the agronomy systems, but the thinking is that wherever or whatever the greatest constraint is in your system, your productivity will only build to that hole. Because then you start to leak, you start to lose it. So even if you've got everything else in order, if you've got one thing that's holding the whole system back, then that's only the level that you can function at. It's true for carbon, it's true for productivity, it's true for everything. So that what we want to do is to say what's our most limiting factor in our systems. Because until we know that, we actually don't know if we're spending money in the right place and trying to optimise the right part of our system. So I've listed here that soil pH and Sam, I want credit because I mentioned acidity in the carbon talk. But I've said soil pH and acidity is generally the most limiting factor in Northeast Victoria. I'd actually like to change that to say if you don't have data to show otherwise, assume that you're operating in a highly acidic environment. Because everywhere we go in Northeast Victoria, that's what we see. So unless you know otherwise, assume that's the case. What we know is many plant species can't grow well and persist at low pH values. We also know that many nutrients are less plant available when you get down to those low pH values. So even if you've got high phosphorus, you've got high nitrogen, you've got potassium, you've got everything else ticking along, if your pH is low, that stuff's in the bank, but the plants don't have the key. They can't get to it. So you're not putting money into a really good place by investing in all this stuff if your pH isn't appropriate. So what we see here is that we buy fertilizers, we apply nutrients, we do everything right, and we go get the plant growth. That's one of the key things we go, well, we're disrupting that performance. What's happening in our systems? We also know that we get reduced microbial function at low pH. And this is really important because there's a lot of emphasis on if we improve the microbes in the system, then everything else can be fixed. But if we don't improve the pH in the system, the microbes will die. Or they'll go somewhere else and they just won't do it. So getting that pH right first is the best thing that we can do to ensure that everything else is functioning. And this particularly comes into play with legumes. You know that our rhizobium, which are a bacteria that come into play with our legumes, they don't function at low pH values. So even if you can grow a clover, or grow a lucerne, or grow something, it may not actually be fixing nitrogen from the air. It may just be relying on soil to allow nitrogen to survive. So if you don't know that your pH is right, you can't assume that you're getting the nitrogen fixation that you expect. So the other thing that happens is that we get poor nitrogen utilization from organic matter. So we know that even if we have organic matter in our systems, at low pH values, the nitrogen from that is not getting extracted, and the phosphorus isn't cycling, and everything else that we like for our organic matter doesn't happen. So the kicker is, if we've got high organic matter levels or high carbon levels, but our pHs are really low, we might say, look, great, carbon days are awesome, happy days, it's all going well. But we know that that organic matter is relatively sterile. It's actually not cycling, it's not functioning, there's very low microbial activity, which is why we actually have that organic matter in the first place, because the microbes aren't working to break it down. So never take a number by itself. If you're looking at carbon values, make sure you know the context of the information that you're dealing with. So we know that once we fix all this through mining, or we know that our pH is right, we can then look at other soil conditions to make sure that they're not limiting work as well. So I mentioned that soil acidity is a key limiting factor. We know that if we have high organic matter in our systems prior to acidification, or we have continued residue coming through at low pH values, it's not actually working for us. So what we see is that even if we have some organic matter there to start with, or we're trying to build it, even in our marine systems, we're not going to get anything that we can use. So we're going to have poor root growth, poor microbial activity, and poor nutrient availability. So in any of the soil carbon things that you might be considering on farm after hearing all the expert speakers today, is first of all think about what might be stopping my carbon from making on my farm. What's the risk that I have to deal with? And first of all, get the numbers, and then you know what you're doing with, which Sue will be talking about later. So this is something that I just wanted to talk through for a few minutes around what it actually means in terms of context of carbon, and what can we do in our systems, what's possible, and what are the key drivers behind that. So this is some data from the Full Soil Initiative that Sam again mentioned this morning. And this is looking at soil samples, almost 830 of them, from paddocks from North East Victoria into the middle of New South Wales. And this is really showing us that in the River and Plains region, which is from the Big Rock up to the south of water, which is the red line, we actually have measured soil carbon values all the way up that curve in the Cochrane paddocks. So these are from paddocks taken in wheat, which we assume is one of our worst case scenarios when it comes to carbon. What we know is that our carbon levels are actually doing pretty well. When we look at GPS located sampling to make sure that we're not getting error associated with the in the paddocks. We can also see that in the farmland region, which is from Wagga up to that Westwala and up to the east, we're also getting a good range of samples coming through. We've got some rainfall. We can see what we call the Central West Farming Systems region, which is from Westwala up to south of Dubbo and west. Under very low rainfall environments, generally our soil carbon levels are low, but they're still seeing a really nice range of carbon. So rather than saying to carbon values, I don't know, about 1, or to pH, I don't know, about 4.8, 5, actually having some numbers, we can actually start to calculate the time carbon value. But what's exciting about these values is that we have all the production data information behind them. So we can actually start to interrogate what's behind these numbers and what we've learned from them. And if we look at our high values, our outliers, we can see that there's some common themes coming through. Our high soil carbon values are associated with pH that's not limiting, so 4.8 or more. There is a history of legume or pasture in about 90% of those samples, and they all highly productive. So the yields of those paddocks are also high, which then suggests that those paddocks are managed for good productivity, which then means good plant growth, good cycling, good options for carbon. Which then brings to the last question, which I'm asking around, in doing everything right, I don't know this anymore. This is something that's really important in our food production systems. So first, think about the fact that in our agricultural systems, we're not dealing with the black box where everything is retained in our system, not a forest or a prairie. We're a food production system, which means we're continuing to take things off our farms. And by doing that, we're continuing to cycle through and move nutrients within everything else. Food production isn't a cycle, it's actually an export process. Okay? That comes into play with our carbon as well. So, thinking about organic matter, and that's a hard ask. Second last week of the day, put some numbers up, taking some calculations, just got my body up a bit. Okay, so let's take an example. Carbon in organic matter, C1 ratio of 10 to 1. Our soil carbon value in this example is 1%. Nice and conservative. Okay, over a season or over a year, we might mineralise or release upwards of 100 kilos of nitrogen from that organic matter into plant growth. So we talk about mineralised nitrogen, which is the nitrogen that was in organic forms and then is converted into plant and other forms, which are nitrates and ammonium sources. Okay? So we've pulled out 100 kilos of mineral nitrogen from that organic matter in 1 year. By doing that, we actually lost a tonne of carbon CO2, which is the carbon that was inspired or breathed out by the microbes responsible for converting that carbon and that nitrogen into plant viable forms. Okay? So you can't beat yourself up about that. That's just kind of by experimenting. But if that carbon and nitrogen is replaced in the system, that's actually when we start to get depletion and mining around the carbon levels. So, if you look at next year, and we still have carbon percentage of 1%, right? That means that we've actually pulled 100 kilos of them back into that system, either through fertiliser or through nitrogen fixes or azote. And we've pulled in a tonne of carbon. So the key is that we talk about increasing carbon values, and we talk about the fact that we need to build carbon. But if you're in a food production system and you're maintaining your carbon levels, you're actually actually doing really well because you actually have a net input of carbon every year into that system. The first time I said this, farmers cried because it's real. This is something that farmers are never talked about. It's a lot of you have to use carbon, right? But at the same time, you're pulling off a heap of wool, beef, meat, hay, grain, anything that you're taking from your system actually results in a loss of carbon, even after the processes in the nutrient cycle. So to maintain your carbon levels is fabulous, which is why I don't think a lot of farmers take enough credit for the fact that if you're retaining stubbles, you're retaining your ground cover in your pasture systems, you're doing everything right, but you're not even losing your carbon, you're actually already doing really well. Because that's the thing, it's a constantly fluxing system. We're not talking about box. You just see, this happens all the time. So by keeping it stable and nudging up when the moisture's good, potentially depleting a bit when you get drought, but generally overall, keeping stable and giving those little incremental gains is fabulous. So the last thing I want to flag, which is obviously being flagged in detail, is when we're thinking about soil organic matter in our systems and giving that sort of carbon, have a think about what your objective is with that. Are you looking to improve and maintain your organic matter for your system, the productivity, the soil health, the nutrient efficiency of cycling, for the diversity of microbes, for getting everything happening well? Or are you looking to sell it? Because your approach will be different according to what you're looking to do. You can't use it and expect to be using it well, and also look to export it to someone else. The other challenge you have is that, as Sandy was saying, companies are getting involved in seeing what's happening down the supply chain, and they have a requirement to start reporting information through. When you're reporting information through, you can't also do a carbon credit on that same piece of land. It's still done to me. So if you're reporting information through supply chain or for your own benefit, then you can also be part of the carbon credit program. So think about what you're doing and why you're doing it and what the relative benefits there are. So finally, just to pull it together, that most of the carbon in our soil is present in soil organic matter. So in terms of managing it, it's around managing our organic matter within our biological systems. That itself is in a continuous state of flux. So we've got accumulation and we've got decomposition happening all the time. And most of the benefits that we receive from organic matter come from its decomposition. If it's not continually breaking down and cycling, we don't see those physical, biological, and chemical benefits that we see. Maintaining the soil carbon bases in food production systems is in itself a massive thing. Increasing and storing and increasing soil carbon is never guaranteed because we're talking about food from export systems that are recycling. And really think about what you want to achieve when it comes to carbon in systems. The value of that organic matter in improving all your productivity, sustainable productivity goals, versus putting that in box, locking it up, and putting a dollar value on that. So that's it. So thank you. And,
Great stuff, Cassie. And I suppose it was interesting to reflect that at a soil, at a carbon conference, that the most essential underpinning thing is what we've just heard. And so we've got all of the policy and the markets, but it's really supported at the end of the day by processes that we receive from our plants and our soils as well. And I think it's quite sobering to think about it in those terms, which is where it all starts. Hey, I was thinking I'd say it's sort of saved the best for last, but today's been an awesome day, and I must say I'm exposed to a lot of talk on carbon, and I can really say the lineup that's gone for today is a real treat. So can't quite say that too, but Sue Briggs works for CSBP as an agronomist and service specialist, and Sue has had a lot of different hats over the year. And one of the things I like about Sue, we often chat, is just Sue's integrity and sort of science-driven approach and customer service has been really great to see over the years. So it's been a pleasure to work with you at time, Sue. So we're into about measurement and sampling and testing. So again, back at the farm level, the important level. So you want the mic or a farm voice? Thanks, Sue.
Thanks, Brad. So I'm going to start off with my key messages for my talk today. So then you can just all get up and go home if you want. But I really want to have, the first one is a clear reason why sampling. So we've talked about carbon sampling. Jim, I really love Jim's talk about identifying our soil constraints. So do we test for identifying our soil constraints, or do we test for our sampling? The next point is carbonate carbon. So there's a number of tests you can select, and you've got to select the right test for your needs. So understand which test you want to do and what you want to find out. Before you start sampling, take the time to research, review sampling guidelines or create your own, and contact your lab to discuss your options, because each lab will have a unique offer and carbon tests, so it's a good idea to give them a call and have a chat. And the last one, I put this in this morning when I was driving up, is don't forget the nutritional sampling program. I'm going to be talking about carbon, but as Cassie has mentioned, and as Jim has mentioned, we can't forget about the other nutrients. So, before you start, I want you to sit down and say, why am I testing for soil carbon? I like Megan's talk, or mention, is don't rush. Everyone's going, I've got to have my baseline. I really need to know what my baseline figure is. And I just think, calm the farm and just wait to figure out what you're going to do with that results, because everyone's rushing in and you're spending money which you might be disappointed because it's going to get a value at the end of the day and you're not 100% sure what it means, whether it's good, bad or indifferent. What do I want to know and what do I want to do with the test? So just things to consider. I'm going to go back a little bit and use some reasons for soil testing from the Church Care Guidelines. And there's 4 reasons. So it's predictive, which is to inform your fertiliser recommendations. And these guidelines differ between advisors. So I'm very interested in the conclusion of Jim's project, because every advisor I talk to has a different way how they set up their sampling program. So it'd be really good to see what people are up to. Monitoring, that's another way of doing it, is you're monitoring the soil concentration and change over time. So you're monitoring either, talk about before, subsurface acidity or carbon. So this is something you can consider a different sampling program. Then you've got the diagnostic and compliance. Sampling guidelines available. So we've mentioned the C5 guidelines, they're quite in depth and there's a lot to take in. There's the START program methodology, and then there's the National Soil Condition Monitoring for Soil pH and Soil Carbon from CSIRO. And the diagram there is the grid sample reference from the CSIRO document. So it is quite intense as well. So people go, geez, I can't do that. That's really hard. So you can develop your own. So before you develop your own, talk to an advisor before you start. Have a clear objection why you're sampling, or you keep on saying that, or through my presentation. You select a representative area in the paddock. And Jim's talk shows that some paddocks really have the variability. So it's really hard to select that representative area. Really talk to geolocate that location. You select the carbon test, develop your sampling protocol, so number of cores, the depth, engaging the sampler and advisor at the same time, sample at the same time of the year, or more importantly, the same environmental conditions. So So if we say we're going to do spring sampling, last year's spring sampling was sampling in mud. So make sure you record your environmental conditions of the sampling. And when you plan to re-sample again, is it going to be 5 years, 10 years time? You might think that's still a lot of work, but if you're doing nutritional guidelines or nutritional to inform your fertiliser decisions, there's some of the things, oops, can we do one more? Not very good with my colour, but there's some of the things you still got to look out for. If you're just adding a few more things on for what you should be really doing. That shouldn't be a picture, that should be a picture of the, what happened there? The picture of the green book. So there's a green book called the Australasian Soil Book, which all commercial labs use. So the first one here I've got is soil carbon, organic carbon, Walkley black. So everyone should know about that one because it's on our nutritional samples, on our nutritional test. It's been used for quite some time. The three that look at total organic carbon are the Heinz, our total carbon branded line is 6.2 and then 6.3. I'm going to just talk about these briefly afterwards. Then we have ones that you can look at the carbon fraction. So you can look at active carbon or actual carbon fractions. Then you can use some of the emerging technology. When I say new and emerging, it's been around 10 or 15 years, so it still hasn't cottoned on yet. And the last one is a soil beta microbial restoration. I'm going to put all these up. I'm not going to read through all of them because you might bore you to death and I don't want you to go to sleep. But go to our website because we do have our tests and methods documents. So go there and have a look and you can have a real good read about it. And we do have a carbon page which I've created, so hopefully you get some more value out of it as well. What has happened? Anyway, I've got pictures all over the shelf. That's what happens when you jump into someone else's computer and don't use your own. So the Walkley black. So there's the green book. The next picture you'll see a Walkley black one. Anyway, it's been around a long time. It was first developed in 1934. That's before any commercial labs were available or doing any soil testing. Developed in the universities. It was revised in 1947. So it's been around a long time and we're still using it. So, as I mentioned before, it's used, you see it all the time in your agricultural tests. But the thing about the Walkley black, it provides an incomplete oxidation of the total organic carbon. So therefore it's 75 to 95% less than what the total organic carbon is. And that's dependent on soil type. And look, that's what it looks like in the lab. Nice pretty colours. I'm just going to put this one up. This is the next iteration of a wet oxidation one. So developed in Heinz in 1984, and it really correlates well with your total carbon combustion, except on your high organic samples such as compost. When it's really high carbon levels, it really doesn't correlate very well. However, it's been superseded because the preferred one by Cyro has been TOC combustion. But it's still available and some people still use it because they've used it over time. Total carbon, high combustion. Some people will hear this as LECO. Some people will call it GMAS high temperature. It gets lots of names, but it's a high temperature combustion. So what they do is they load it into a machine, and as my senior chemist says, they cook the shit out of it, and then they measure the gas produced, and that's of carbon. So all carbon compounds convert to CO2, which is measured, and that is including your carbonates, which Cassie mentioned earlier. The other one, you can add a pre-treatment with an acid. And when you do that, you take out that inorganic carbon, those lines. So therefore, you are looking at your true carbon value. Still goes through the LECO, and this is the test we've added to our certified test package. Some labs will use a fizz test before, and I don't know if anyone knows what a fizz test is. You're just looking to see if there's any carbonates present, so you put some hydrochloric acid on some soil, and if it fizzes and makes a reaction, you think, oh, there's carbonate present, so therefore I've still got to do this test. Cindy Kenners is really particular with the names and everything, he's brought it into me. It's a very subjective test. So you can do that very subjectively and then do the carbon test, or you can just do the acid treatment first, and you already know you've reduced the carbonates from the sample. Okay, so I've talked about organic carbon, total carbon, now I'm talking about our fractions. So this is active carbon, and sometimes it's called low-vol carbon, sometimes it's called reactive carbon, sometimes, I just had a research on the phone this week, we call it POXC carbon, which I have to ask you what that meant, and it's exactly what it is. So it's all the same thing, looking for the same stuff. So this is, you can do this in the field, we've done this before, it's a pretty cool test. And so it's another wet oxidation test, and you're looking for that carbon that's above the decomposition. It's a very time-specific test. So as I've shown up there, it's mixed for 2 minutes, and then you put that analyse, assess. If you leave it for 5 minutes, you'll get a different result. So it really is time-specific. As I mentioned, look at there, the field test, you can do this out in the field if you really want to. But the thing about this is you want to have correct sampling, handling. And with all carbon tests, you probably want to make sure your sample handling is correct. So when you take the sample, don't put it on the dashboard of your vehicle and drive around for the rest of the day and leave it there over the weekend, because your buds will utilize a lot of stuff. So try and keep it in a cool place, get it home, air dried at home before you send it to the lab. I just want to put up about what these results mean, because we're getting a lot of questions of people wanting to do active carbon tests. I'm just wondering why they want to do that. I was looking for some guidelines, and I found one by Moody and Shaw, guidelines for, if you look at tropical upland soils, so in Queensland. I couldn't find anything for pasture soils in Victoria, maybe I didn't look very hard, there might be some out there, I'm really not sure. But it really does, generally will show you the changes of the carbon, the impact. This is showing what will happen under different management decisions, really. I know IPL are using this in some of their soil health package to demonstrate that some systems will need this to keep what did Kim say? He's doing it in the cropping area, and after a legume, which, as he mentioned, you see a good active carbon level, and continuous cropping is a bit lower, but that's about all general it is. Carbon fractions, really quickly, because it's a very expensive test, we do it. It was done, and here's a slide from Jeff Baldock. They did it in the SCARP project, in which they did MRI on these samples. But the thing is that MRI is sitting with a machine in Cyro in Adelaide, so none of us can access those databases. But it does break down all the particle sizes, which Cassie mentioned, your crop residue, your particulate, your humus, and your residual. That's done on all carbon fractions, because they're finding it in all fractions. And it still goes through the litre. Back to NRI, MRI, spectra. So the main difference is the wavelength band, which each machine operates under. Pretty limited information about this one. Your NRI, you'll probably see more in your plants, your forages and your grains, that you use it, and it's still well suited for field scanning in a way. MRI really has to be done in the lab, because the soil's going to be dry and ground for that to happen. So you really got to bring it back to the lab. And this is some, doing a bit of Google search, looking at whether this can replace your actual testing of your chemical testing of your other nutrients. This is done in Roseworthy in South Australia, and you can see you've got an R squared factor. So when that is closer to 1, that is meaning that the MRI result is just as equivalent as the lab result. So they are getting some pretty close equivalents in Roseworthy, South Australia. The reason why I'm stressing Roseworthy, South Australia is that you need to have a really each soil type and each variation of soil types but have a calibration set. So every machine has to have a calibration set that we can refer back to. So it's very costly to set up a machine to produce quality results. And also each machine has got to have a unique calibration set. So if you have a history with the lab with one of these, you'll make sure they have the same machine as they use. The thing about this, when they say we're using this to potentially reduce the cost, you still got to take a soil sample and send it to the lab. So, if you're going to do that, why don't you just do the wet chemistry test that they're really good at doing, and this could be something you can do on the side. You still got to do the work. Last one, the soil beta test. Look, this is pulled from their website. Funky things happening, before things. So look, it's offered at Nutrient Advantage. We've got the kit, but we don't really promote that we can do it. But it's just looking at the microbial restoration. So, they wet a dry sample and test for 24 hours to see what the activity is. And there's the ratings from the website, so it's pretty broad. I just wanted to touch quickly on some of the tech that's out there now. Because the federal government mentioned last week, had an announcement, they've got $20 million for technology to help farmers store carbon, about reducing that cost. We want to reduce that cost down to $3 a hectare. So these are two that I just have known a bit about because I've followed to home over a number of years and followed their journey. So they use NRI technology on their device. What they do is they take the whole core, they take it back to the lab, and then they scan it. So once again, they're still taking the core sample and that sort of stuff. There's the last Soil Science conference last year. Tim Weaver presented on the work that he did on cotton trial, nitrogen trial, and fertile soils. And his conclusion was that we need to do a calibration set for each soil type. And even on versatile soils, they did find some other variation. Versatile soils are reckoned to be quite similar across the board. Another thing he mentioned when I had a chat to him afterwards was that homes keep changing their devices. So they keep updating their devices because they keep getting better, so they're going to buy another one. And so he said that's get frustrating for people down the supply chain because they've got to keep on buying new devices. The other one is RenScan. I watched a webinar on this, and this is using MRI technology, and it's really from the mining industry, and they're trying to see whether it fits in agriculture. It looks pretty funky there. You can put a machine down and we'll scan the soil. Talking to Cassie the other day on the phone, she's testing, I don't know if she tested this one, but something very similar. So testing the top little bit of the soil, and because it's using MRI technology, you've got to purchase a little portable drying unit to dry the sample and chuck it on the back of you as you do and do it out there in the field. So, they're out there, but I don't know whether they'll be cost effective because you're still going to take a sample, but even take all that time. So, soil testing lab, that's what we're trying to keep alive. I'm on my last slide. Right, so before you start, be proactive and talk to your advisor or ring the lab to discuss your options. We're getting a lot of samples coming in with the note, and we're meant to know what you guys want. So please ring before you do send it in. Take the time, but also I wanted to end up. I wrote this down whilst I've been listening to the last three speakers, is that even if you don't think carbon testing is worthwhile for you, you might think that's all too much, I really don't want to do it. at least consider regular nutritional soil testing on a regular basis, because that will give you the great deal of data, as Cassie mentioned, as Jim's mentioned. We're not doing that enough to understand the trends over time. Thank you.
What a real scoop. That was good, Sue, and yeah,